Growing up, my relationship with my father was nothing short of tumultuous, a constant storm of emotions that I never could escape. He was always there, physically present in my life, but emotionally distant. For years, I endured cruel treatment at the hands of my stepmother, Jan, and my father did nothing. In fact, he chose to ignore it, turning a blind eye to the constant bullying and emotional abuse I faced. I remember countless nights crying myself to sleep, begging for my father's help, but instead of defending me, he chose to protect Jan, a woman who treated me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. Each time I tried to speak up, to tell him what was happening, he dismissed my pain as if it were irrelevant. The words, "She's just trying to be a mother to you," echoed in my mind, an excuse he gave to justify her behavior. But no, it wasn't about her trying to be a mother. It was about her wielding her power over me while my father remained silent, too weak to stand up to her. It was clear he didn't want to rock the boat. Every time I confronted him, he would tell me that I was the problem, that I was being too sensitive, that I should just let things go. The worst part? I believed him for so long. I thought it was my fault, that I was the one who was ungrateful for the love they showed me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My father had chosen to let her walk all over me, and I had to live with that betrayal every single day. What kind of father stands by and watches his daughter suffer, all to keep the peace with someone who is tormenting her? That was the question that haunted me for years. The constant disappointment I felt toward my father became a heavy weight I carried every day. I had hoped for so long that he would see the truth, that he would finally acknowledge the pain Jan had inflicted on me, but it never came. Every time I tried to talk to him about her treatment, he would dismiss me as if my feelings were insignificant. And what hurt the most was knowing that he was the one person who could have made a difference. He was the only one with the power to stop it, to stand up for me. But instead, he chose to protect Jan, the woman who made life miserable. It was maddening the way he refused to admit his mistakes. How could he not see what was happening? How could he be so blind, so selfish, to let her control everything, even our relationship? Each time I poured my heart out to him, he would brush it aside, telling me to just let go of the past, that it wasn't as bad as I made it seem. But how could I forget? How could I just move on when I was still living in the aftermath of everything he allowed to happen? There were moments, fleeting ones, when I thought I saw a glimpse of remorse in his eyes, but it was always followed by more excuses. I couldn't do anything, he would say, as if his inaction was somehow justified. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he understood how much his silence had scarred me. But I knew it would be pointless. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. I wasn't the priority. Jan always came first, and that crushed me over and over again. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. My father's visit, which I once thought could be the turning point, only reinforced the truth I had been trying to ignore for so long. Despite him acknowledging in his own way that he had let Jan mistreat me, he refused to apologize directly, to take full responsibility. His words were empty, lacking the sincerity I so desperately needed. He didn't understand, he never truly did, that it wasn't enough to simply recognize the past wrongs. What I needed was a commitment, a real change in how he treated me, a shift in priorities. But it was clear that Jan was still at the center of his world. When he said he couldn't attend my wedding without her, I realized that nothing had changed. He was still afraid of her, still too eager to please her, even if it meant losing me in the process. I had spent years hoping for the father I deserved, but instead, I was faced with a man who would rather live in denial, a man who valued his peace over my pain. I didn't ask for much. I wasn't demanding that he choose me over Jan, but I'd asked him to stand by me, to show that he cared enough to make things right. And yet, he couldn't do that. His lack of a real apology, his refusal to put me first, made it clear to me that no matter how much I longed for a connection, it was never going to happen if Jan remained his priority. I couldn't, in good conscience, try to rebuild a relationship with someone who could not even offer the most basic form of respect and care. The day I finally planned my wedding, I knew deep down that the decision I was about to make would have lasting consequences. The thought of having my father at my wedding, of somehow salvaging that part of our relationship, was tempting. But then it became crystal clear to me, as much as I wanted my father there, I would not invite him if it meant allowing Jan to be part of my special day. I had spent years hoping that my father would choose me over Jan, that he would recognize the emotional toll his inaction had taken on me. But now, with my wedding on the horizon, it became clear that my father had never truly seen me. He still stood by Jan, the woman who had tormented me for so long. He had, once again, put his own peace above my pain. And so, when my father came to me, asking if he could attend the wedding only if Jan was invited, my heart sank. His request, a final blow to the fragile remnants of our relationship, made it impossible for me to entertain the idea of inviting him. I refused, and I knew without hesitation that I had made the right choice. I would not allow Jan, the person who had caused me so much harm, to be part of a day that was supposed to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. If my father could not stand up to her, if he could not put me first, then he had no place in my life or at my wedding. It was a painful decision, one that required me to let go of the hope that he would ever choose me over her. But it was a decision that I could never undo. The wedding would be mine, and only the people who truly supported me would be there. The day of my wedding finally arrived, and as I stood there beside Caleb, everything felt right. It was a moment of pure joy, a day I had dreamed about for so long. And there was everything I had wanted, just Caleb, my mother, and the people who truly loved and supported me. Despite my father's absence, despite the pain I had felt from his betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. This was my day, and I wasn't going to let the empty space left by someone who never truly stood by me overshadow the love that surrounded me. I thought I would feel the weight of my father's absence more, but instead, I felt lighter. The people who had always been there for me, especially Caleb and my mother, were there to celebrate the love we had built together. Caleb stood beside me through every storm, always putting me first, always listening, always showing me the care and respect that my father never did. My mother, too, had been my rock throughout all the years of heartache, and her unwavering support gave me the strength to let go of the past. The absence of my father didn't leave a void. It revealed the truth of our relationship. He was never really there for me when I needed him most. My life was finally free from the toxic web Jan had woven, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else's approval. The wedding was a celebration of new beginnings, of love that was real and lasting, and I was content. I didn't need the validation of people who had failed me. I had Caleb, I had my mother, and that was all I needed. As time passed after my wedding, the harsh reality began to set in. My father's promises, his words about wanting to change, to rebuild our relationship, had been nothing more than hollow gestures. Despite all his talk about trying to fix things, his actions spoke louder, and they confirmed what I had known deep down. He didn't truly care about mending our bond. I had allowed myself to believe that there was still a chance for us, that his regret could turn into genuine change. But after everything, his refusal to stand up for me against Jan, his inability to put his daughter first, it became painfully clear that my father was never going to be the father I needed him to be. The day of the wedding, with his absence looming over the event, was the final turning point for me. The pain of knowing that he wouldn't attend, despite all the promises, was now overshadowed by the realization that he had never truly been there for me. I wasn't going to waste any more of my life waiting for a man who couldn't even find the courage to apologize properly, let alone show up for the people who mattered. I had been fighting for this relationship for so long, but it was time to stop. It was time to stop trying to fix something that was never meant to be fixed. I wasn't going to keep hoping that one day my father would change. I had already found the love and support I needed from Caleb and my mother. They had always been there, and they were the ones who truly had my back. I decided to let go of my father and his empty promises. From that moment on, I focused only on the people who truly cared for me. After everything that had happened, the countless years of emotional neglect, my father's refusal to defend me against Jan's cruelty, and his inability to ever truly be the father I needed, I reached a point where I knew I had to walk away. The weight of disappointment that I had carried for so long was finally lifted, but it wasn't without a sense of finality. I had spent my entire life yearning for my father's love and approval, but the truth was clear now. He was never going to change. No amount of hoping, no amount of trying to fix things would make him into the father I deserved. I had given him enough chances, enough of myself. The time had come to put my energy into what truly mattered, the people who had been there for me, the ones who had shown me the unconditional love and support that my father had never given me. Caleb, my husband, had been my rock through all of this, and my mother, who had always been a steadfast presence in my life, was now my ally more than ever. These were the people who truly understood me, who stood by me when everything fell apart, and they were the ones who deserved my time and attention. The decision was made. I would no longer chase after a relationship that had always been one-sided and unfulfilling. I would focus on my future, my happiness, and my new life with Caleb. I had the strength to cut ties with my father for good and embrace a life surrounded by those who truly cared. No more looking back, no more wasted energy on someone who would never change. This was my life now, and I was determined to live it on my terms.